Princess Valtoria sat in the grand hall of the royal palace, her eyes scanning the ornate surroundings. The shimmering gold walls, the fine tapestries depicting victories from her people's past, the towering columns carved with images of ancient heroes, everything screamed power and tradition. It was all beautiful, but to Valtoria it was stifling. She longed for something more. She wanted freedom, not the weight of an empire's expectations. As the eldest daughter of King Eulorian, the ruler of the powerful Valsarian Empire, Valtoria's life was mapped out for her long before she could understand its meaning. She was a political tool, a princess to be used in alliances that would strengthen the empire, and now her father had arranged her marriage to Prince Leos, the heir to a neighboring star system. The news didn't come as a surprise. Nothing ever did in her world. It was just another piece in the grand chessboard of politics. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. Valtoria had been raised to believe in the importance of duty, to place the needs of the empire above her own desires, and yet, the thought of marrying someone she didn't love, someone she barely knew, made her chest tighten with frustration. She tried to hide her feelings, sitting still as her father spoke about the importance of this union. King Eulorian's deep voice echoed through the hall as he praised the alliance with Leos's family. His words were filled with conviction, as always, but Valtoria couldn't shake the feeling that she was nothing more than a pawn in his game. Valtoria, father said, turning to her with a stern look. This marriage will secure our future. The Valsarian Empire must stand strong. This is our duty. Valtoria lowered her eyes, nodding politely, but inside, she felt a storm brewing. She had been trained to be the perfect princess, poised, obedient, and willing to sacrifice her happiness for the good of the empire. But what about her happiness? Did she even have the right to want something more? Her thoughts were interrupted when a servant entered the room, carrying a message. He handed it to the king, who read it quickly before looking up with an expression of surprise. Apparently there has been a change of plans, the king said, his voice filled with curiosity. It seems we have a new candidate for your marriage. Valtoria raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. She had heard whispers of an agreement between her father and Earth, but she hadn't paid much attention to the details. Now it seemed the time had come for that agreement to be fulfilled. A human? She asked, unable to hide the disdain in her voice. Why would you bring a human into our royal family? Her father's gaze hardened, but he remained calm. The Earth Alliance has insisted on this arrangement. A human groom will signify our commitment to this new partnership. It will also send a message to the rest of the galaxy about our influence. Valtoria could hardly believe what she was hearing. A human? To be her husband? It was laughable. Humans were nothing, like the noble beings of her species. They were primitive, chaotic, and unrefined in comparison to the Valsarians. The doors to the hall opened, and Valtoria turned to see a tall figure step inside. She was prepared to see someone insignificant, someone she could easily dismiss. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. The man who entered was not what she expected. He wasn't hunched over or awkward as humans often were in her mind. No, he stood tall and confident, with a posture that spoke of strength. His hair was dark and short, and his eyes were a striking shade of blue, eyes that seemed to hold a depth of knowledge, as though he had seen things that most of her people could never comprehend. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. This is Jared, her father said, gesturing to the human. He has been chosen as your groom. Valtoria stared at him, her mind racing. He was not like the other humans she had heard about in stories. He wasn't small or weak, with his thick arms and strong frame. There was something about him, something she couldn't place. Was it the quiet confidence he carried, the calmness in his demeanor that seemed to stand in stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts in her own mind? Jared looked at her with an expression that was neither fearful nor awed by her presence. Instead, there was curiosity in his eyes and something else, something like respect. He stood there, waiting for her to say something, but she didn't know what to say. What? Could she say? That she found it ridiculous, that she was furious at the idea? Instead, she remained silent, her gaze locked on him as if he were a puzzle she couldn't solve. After a long pause, Jared spoke, his voice calm and steady. Princess Valtoria, it is an honor to meet you. I understand the significance of this union, and I want you to know that I will respect you and your people. His words were simple, but there was a sincerity to them that made her pause. She had expected arrogance, fear, or ignorance, but he didn't seem to possess any of those traits. Was this what her father had chosen for her? You don't have to do this, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. She couldn't help herself. She was angry, frustrated, and confused. You don't know me, and I don't know you. Why would you agree to this? Jared's expression softened, and for the first time, Valtoria saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I agreed because my people need alliances, just as yours do, he replied, his tone gentle but firm. But I also agreed because I believe in what this marriage represents, not just a political union but the potential for something more. Valtoria couldn't help but feel a strange pang in her chest. She had always been taught to view marriage as a duty, a transaction. But this man, this human, was speaking of it as something more. Was it possible that he saw something in this union that she had overlooked? Her thoughts were interrupted by her father's voice. Enough of this. The decision has been made, King Eulorian said, his tone final. Valtoria, you will marry Jared. This union will benefit us all. But as Valtoria looked back at Jared, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was beginning to change. Maybe, just maybe, this marriage wouldn't be as simple as she had imagined. The days that followed were filled with the sounds of preparations for the royal wedding, but Valtoria couldn't focus. Her mind kept returning to Jared, the human who had been chosen as her groom. He had an air of quiet confidence about him that was hard to ignore. But the more she thought about it, the more she struggled with the idea of marrying someone from a completely different world. Valtoria had always been taught that her people, the Valsarians, were the superior race. They were powerful, intelligent, and advanced in ways no other species could match. Humans, on the other hand, were still stuck in a chaotic phase of development. Their technology was primitive compared to the Valsarians, and their culture seemed disorganized and unpredictable. It was almost laughable that her father thought a human could be her equal. Yet, Jared didn't seem to fit the stereotypes she had been taught. When she had first met him, his calm presence had been a stark contrast to her own internal chaos. He wasn't overwhelmed by her royal status, and he wasn't afraid of the weight of the marriage that was about to happen. Instead, he treated her as if she were just another person, which both irritated and intrigued her. The first real conversation between them happened when Valtoria was walking through the palace gardens one afternoon. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the flowers and statues. Valtoria had hoped to get some fresh air and clear her mind. As she walked along the path, she spotted Jared standing near a fountain, looking out over the water. Without thinking, she walked closer. "You're always so calm," she said, her voice carrying the hint of frustration she had been holding back. Jared turned and gave her a small smile. "I've always believed that calm is the best way to handle any situation," he replied, his voice steady. Valtoria paused, studying him. There was something about his demeanor that made him different from everyone she had met before. He wasn't just a soldier or a politician trying to impress her. He was a human, yet there was a depth to him that intrigued her. "I don't understand why you agreed to this," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why would you come here to marry someone you don't even know? Doesn't it bother you?" Jared took a deep breath before responding. "It's not easy, but I knew what I was signing up for. My people need allies just as yours do. And besides," he added with a wry smile, "I can't say I didn't find you interesting." Valtoria's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly masked the feeling. "Interesting?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'm nothing like you." Jared's eyes softened. "No, you're not. But that's what makes this fascinating. We come from different worlds, yes, but there's something about you that's real. You're not like the others who've been groomed for this life. There's more to you than just your royal title. Valtoria felt her cheeks flush, though she tried to hide it. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Her whole life had been about being a perfect princess. Obedient, graceful, powerful. But Jared seemed to see beyond the title, beyond the crown. "Why are you so different?" she asked, almost to herself. She hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Jared's smile widened. "Maybe. It's because I see you as a person, not as a princess." There was a long silence between them, and for a moment Valtoria didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to this, being seen for who she really was. She had always been the princess, the future queen, the symbol of her empire. But Jared was treating her like a person, not a title. "I'm not sure I can marry you," she said quietly, looking away. "I've never been given a choice in my life. This is all too much." Jared stepped closer, though not too close. He didn't want to overwhelm her, but his words were sincere. "I don't want to pressure you, Valtoria. But I do want you to know something." He paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I believe in this, whatever this may turn out to be." Valtoria felt a strange mix of emotions. She wanted to be angry at him for making it sound so easy, but part of her couldn't help but feel touched by his words. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her like this, as though she had a say in her future. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted. "You're a human. We're so different. Our worlds are so far apart. How could we ever make this work?" Jared's eyes darkened slightly, but he didn't look upset. Instead, there was a quiet determination in them. "You'd be surprised how much can be built on trust. Different doesn't mean impossible." Valtoria shook her head, frustrated. She didn't want to admit it, but part of her was beginning to listen to him, to consider the idea that maybe, just maybe, this union wasn't as impossible as she thought. It didn't make sense. He was human, and she was a princess. Their worlds were galaxies apart, and yet, "You're not like anyone I've met," she finally said, her voice softer than she intended. Jared didn't respond right away, and for a brief moment, they stood in silence, the only sound the soft trickle of the fountain in the background. Valtoria felt an unfamiliar weight lift from her chest, replaced by a curiosity she hadn't felt in years. "I know I'm not who you expected," Jared said after a while, his voice gentle. "But I'm still here. I'm still trying." Valtoria nodded slowly, unsure of where this conversation was going, but feeling something shift within her. Maybe it wasn't about whether she liked him, or whether this marriage made sense. Maybe it was about learning to see things differently. Maybe it was about realizing that she didn't have to be alone in this. For the first time since the wedding had been arranged, Valtoria allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't just a pawn in her father's political games. Maybe she could make this work. Maybe, just maybe, Jared wasn't so different after all. And with that, the princess found herself lost in thought, unsure of what the future held, but willing to find out. The days seemed to stretch on, each one filled with the tension of preparing for the wedding. The royal palace buzzed with activity as the date approached. Valtoria was caught in a whirlwind of meetings, ceremonies, and political matters, but her mind often wandered back to the conversation she had with Jared. Every time she saw him, her heart stirred, and the nagging feeling that something in her life was changing grew stronger. Despite the pressure surrounding her, Valtoria found herself seeking out moments to be with Jared. There was something about him, something calming in the way he listened to her. He never rushed her to make decisions, never tried to convince her of anything. He simply offered his support, allowing her the space to figure things out for herself. But still, Valtoria struggled. The weight of her responsibilities was heavy, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was trapped in a world where her choices weren't her own. The empire, her father's wishes, the political alliance, everything seemed to demand her compliance, leaving no room for what she wanted. It was one evening after a long day of dealing with the pressures of court that Valtoria found herself walking through the palace gardens once again. The air was cool, and the scent of the flowers was soothing. She had always loved this place, away from the crowds, the politics, and the expectations. As she wandered through the familiar paths, she spotted Jared standing by the fountain again, just like he had days before. He was gazing out at the water, his posture relaxed, but there was something about him that seemed different this time. His expression was serious, almost contemplative. Valtoria walked closer, her footsteps light, on the soft grass. "I never thought I'd be here standing on the verge of a marriage I never wanted," she said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. Jared turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of understanding and concern. "I know. This isn't easy for you, Valtoria. You've been given so little choice in your life, and now you're being forced into a decision you're not ready to make." She looked away, feeling the weight of his words. She had tried to ignore the growing sense of frustration within her, but it was becoming harder to do. "It's not just that," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this anymore. I've spent my whole life serving my people, doing what's expected of me. But I feel lost. I don't know who I am anymore." Jared took a step closer, his gaze soft but filled with sincerity. "Valtoria, it's okay to feel lost. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to be perfect." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. "But I've been taught that I have to be perfect. I've been trained to be a symbol, to represent the Empire, to make everyone proud. What if I can't do it? What if I fail?" Jared shook his head, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not a symbol, Valtoria. You're a person, with dreams, fears, and hopes. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You don't have to do everything for everyone else. You deserve to live your life for yourself too." Valtoria felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so many years focusing on the needs of her empire, her father's wishes, the expectations of the royal court. She had never allowed herself to consider what she wanted. What if she was too lost to even know? "Then what do I do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jared stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You start by letting go of the fear. Let go of the idea that you have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. It's not easy, but you have to start somewhere. Start by choosing what feels right for you, not for anyone else." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Valtoria felt a rush of emotions wash over her. For so long she had felt suffocated by duty, by the constant pressure to be everything for everyone. But Jared's words made her realize that she didn't have to be everything to everyone. She just needed to be true to herself. "Do you really think I can?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "What if I make the wrong choice? What if I disappoint everyone?" Jared's expression softened, and he took another step forward. "You can't live your life based on the fear of disappointing others. You have to live for yourself, Valtoria. Whatever choice you make, I'll stand by you. But it has to be your choice, not anyone else's." A wave of relief washed over her, but it was mixed with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the consequences. But for the first time, it wasn't the fear that controlled her. It was the possibility of something different, the possibility of freedom. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to make this decision," Valtoria said, her voice trembling slightly. Jared's smile was gentle, full of understanding. "You are. You just have to believe that you are. You've been carrying the weight of the Empire on your shoulders for so long. Maybe it's time to set it down, even if just for a moment." Valtoria looked at him, her heart racing. She had never felt so vulnerable in her life. But there was also something freeing about it. For the first time, she didn't have to be the perfect princess, the perfect heir to the throne. She could simply be herself. "I wish I could just disappear," she said softly, more to herself than to Jared. "I wish I could leave all of this behind and just be free." Jared's eyes softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to disappear, Valtoria. You just have to find yourself again. And I'll be here, whatever you decide." Valtoria felt a tear slip down her cheek, but She didn't wipe it away. She wasn't sure if she was crying from fear, relief, or a mix of both, but for the first time in a long time she didn't feel so alone. "I don't know what the future holds," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "But I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, it's okay to make the future my own." Jared smiled, his gaze steady and comforting. "It is, Valtoria. It always has been." For the first time in years, Valtoria felt a sense of hope. She didn't know what would happen next, but the days leading up to the wedding seemed to pass in a blur, the weight of the decision hanging over Valtoria's head. It wasn't just the ceremony itself, it was everything that came with it. The empire, her father, the expectations that had been placed on her shoulders since she was a child. It was all so overwhelming. But despite the pressure, something inside her had changed. She had felt the shift. For the first time, Valtoria began to consider what she wanted, not just what her father or the court wanted. She had spent so many years following the path laid out for her, always doing what was expected, always thinking about duty before anything else. But now, Jared's words echoed in her mind. "What feels right for you?" She couldn't ignore it anymore. She had tried, but every time she saw Jared, every time they spoke, she felt the tug of something new. He wasn't like anyone she had ever met. He was calm, kind, and, in a way, more honest than most of the people she had encountered in her life. He didn't hide behind titles or power. He saw her for who she really was, a woman with hopes and fears, dreams and doubts. That morning, as she prepared for the wedding, Valtoria stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The royal gown she wore was beautiful, the intricate embroidery glittering in the light, but it didn't feel like it belonged to her. It felt like a costume, a symbol of everything she had been forced to become. She looked at herself, but for the first time she didn't see the perfect princess, the future queen. She saw someone trapped by the expectations of others, someone who had never been allowed to choose for herself. "Valtoria?" Her father's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression serious but proud. "It's time." Valtoria took a deep breath, her heart racing. The wedding was moments away, and this was the moment that would seal her fate. But as she looked at her father, she realized that this wasn't just about her father's wishes anymore. This was about her too. For so long she had feared disappointing him, letting him down, but now she realized that she couldn't keep living for someone else. "I'll be there," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Her father nodded, though there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "You've made the right choice. This marriage will secure our future." Valtoria forced a smile, but her mind was elsewhere. As she followed her father through the grand halls of the palace, she couldn't help but think of Jared. His words echoed in her ears. "You deserve to live your life for yourself." The ceremony hall was grand, filled with royal guests and dignitaries from across the galaxy. The air was thick with anticipation, the soft murmur of voices blending with the sounds of music from the orchestra. Valtoria could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on her, but as she walked toward the altar, she felt like she was walking in a dream. She had never felt so distant from everything that was happening. When she reached the altar, she looked up and saw Jared standing there, waiting for her. He was dressed in formal attire, the dark fabric contrasting sharply with her bright gown. There was no look of expectation in his eyes, no pressure. He simply looked at her with calmness, like he was ready for whatever came next. For the first time, she didn't feel like a princess being forced into a marriage. She felt like a person who was about to make a choice. The ceremony began, and Valtoria's mind wandered as the priest spoke the traditional vows. She had memorized these words for years, had practiced them over and over in her mind. But today, they felt different. Today, the words didn't seem to carry the same meaning they once had. She couldn't help but wonder, what if I don't want to say them? Her heart pounded in her chest. She was standing there on the edge of a decision that could change everything. The choice wasn't just between her and Jared. It was between her duty to the Empire and her right to choose her own path. Her thoughts raced. Could she really go through with it? Could she marry someone she barely knew, someone she had once considered beneath her? And then, in that moment, she realized the answer. It wasn't about who Jared was or where he came from. It wasn't about the politics of the situation or the pressures of the empire. It was about what felt right, what made her feel alive. And for the first time, Valtoria realized that the only thing that mattered was her own choice. "I can't do this," she said, her voice breaking through the silence of the ceremony. Everyone in the room froze, their eyes wide with shock. Her father's face was pale, his jaw clenched with disbelief. Jared looked at her, his expression soft, waiting for her to explain. "I'm sorry," Valtoria continued, her voice trembling but full of conviction. "I can't marry you, not like this, not when I don't know who I am. I've spent my whole life doing what others expect of me, and I've never had the chance to choose for myself. But now, I'm choosing. I have to find my own path." Her father's face turned red with anger, but Valtoria stood firm. "I've made my decision," she said quietly, her voice steady now. "I won't go through with this marriage unless it's something I choose." The room was silent for a long moment. Her father looked like he might say something, but then he fell silent. And for the first time, Valtoria felt like she was in control of her life. Jared stepped forward, his expression kind but understanding. "Valtoria, I respect your decision. You have to do what feels right for you." Valtoria looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Jared," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry if I've hurt you." Jared shook his head. "You haven't hurt me. You're just finding your way, and that's something I'll always respect." Her father didn't speak. He simply turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing through the grand hall. Valtoria stood there, her hands trembling at her sides, but for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt free. As she left the ceremony hall, she knew there was no going back. The decision had been made. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. This was the first step in finding her own path. The aftermath of the ceremony was quieter than Valtoria expected. As the final words of the royal vows echoed through the halls, she had thought the world would collapse. She had been prepared for her father's anger, the disappointment in his eyes, and the fury that would follow her decision. But instead, there was only silence. The guests, stunned by her sudden refusal to marry, had whispered among themselves. It was a scandalous scene, one that no one could have predicted. But Valtoria didn't regret it. She felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off her chest. For the first time in her life, she was making a decision that was hers and hers alone. It was a feeling she couldn't explain, but it was freeing. Her father had walked out of the hall, leaving her standing there, heart pounding, unsure of what to do next. The eyes of the kingdom were on her, waiting to see what would happen. But, for now, Valtoria only had one thing on her mind: finding her own path. She stepped out of the ceremony hall, the cool air of the evening hitting her skin as she walked through the gardens. The sun had set, casting a warm golden glow across the palace grounds. It was peaceful, in stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. Her heart raced with uncertainty, but she knew she couldn't stay in the palace, not with the eyes of her father and the court watching her every move. She needed space. She needed time to think. And then, there was Jared. As she walked down the stone pathway, she spotted him standing near the edge of the garden, looking up at the stars. It was as if he had been waiting for her, as if he had known this moment would. "Come, Jared," she called, her voice soft but steady. He turned to face her, his expression calm but filled with warmth. "Valtoria," he said, stepping forward. "I'm glad you came." "I don't know what I've done," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I thought I was making the right choice, but now everything feels so uncertain." Jared stepped closer, his presence comforting. "It's okay to feel uncertain. You're making a choice for yourself. That's something most people never get the chance to do." Valtoria shook her head, her mind still swirling. "But I've ruined everything. I've disappointed my father, my people. I was supposed to be the perfect princess, the perfect heir. Now I've thrown all of that away. Jared smiled gently, his eyes full of understanding. You didn't throw anything away. You found something more important. You found yourself, and that's something no one can take away from you. Her chest tightened, and for the first time in a long while, Valtoria felt a tear slip down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but Jared noticed. He stepped forward, not saying anything, but simply offering his presence. It was enough. I don't know what will happen next, she said quietly, but I think I'm finally ready to find out. Jared placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle and reassuring. Whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone. Valtoria looked up at him, meeting his eyes. There was something in his gaze that made her feel seen, understood, in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her heart raced not from fear but from something new, a possibility, a hope that had been buried deep within her. She had spent so long following the path set out for her, never questioning it. But now, for the first time, she felt like she could breathe. She wasn't bound by duty. She wasn't trapped in a future she hadn't chosen. She had the power to make her own decisions, and that was more valuable than any royal title or political alliance. I think I've been running from myself for so long, she whispered. I didn't know how to stop. Jared's smile deepened, and he gave her shoulder a small encouraging squeeze. It's never too late to start living for yourself. You just have to trust that the future will unfold in its own way. Valtoria nodded slowly, a sense of calm settling over her. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She didn't know where her path would lead, but she wasn't worried anymore. She had made a choice for herself, and that was all that mattered. I'm sorry for the way everything has turned out, she said softly. I didn't mean to cause trouble for anyone, but I couldn't marry Prince Leos. Not if it wasn't my choice. Jared's gaze softened and he stepped closer, his voice warm. You don't have to apologize. You've done what's best. For you. And that's something I admire. Valtoria took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long was finally gone. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she had made the right decision. She didn't need to live for anyone else's expectations. She could live for herself. She smiled at Jared, feeling a connection between them that went beyond words. Thank you, she said quietly, for being here, for helping me see that I don't have to be perfect. Jared smiled back, his eyes filled with understanding. You don't need to be perfect, Valtoria. You're already enough. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the stars shining above them. Valtoria felt something stir in her chest, something warm and new. She had no idea what would come next, but in that moment she realized she didn't have to know. She was free to choose to live her life on her own terms, and for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but for Valtoria, that was no longer something to fear. It was a world of possibilities, and for the first time she was ready to embrace it. The days passed quickly, and the tension in the royal palace grew as the wedding date approached. Valtoria couldn't stop thinking about Jared, though she tried to focus on her royal duties. She had been taught to hide her emotions, to wear the mask of a princess at all times. But something inside her was shifting, something she wasn't sure how to handle. Every time she saw Jared, it was as if her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't explain it. He was human, a species she had always considered beneath her, and yet he was different. He spoke to her like an equal, something no one else had ever done. No one else dared to. The others, including her own people, always treated her as if she were a symbol, not a person. Jared, however, treated her like a person with real thoughts, real feelings. He listened to her, even when she didn't ask for it. He didn't speak in riddles like the nobles, nor did he try to impress her with empty words. He simply listened, and that made her feel seen. But there was a part of her that fought it. Valtoria had spent her entire life being groomed to be the perfect ruler. She couldn't allow herself to be distracted by feelings that didn't make sense. She couldn't afford to make the mistake of trusting a human, no matter how kind or sincere he seemed. This marriage was a duty, a political arrangement that would secure her kingdom's future, not a love story. She couldn't forget her father's words. This marriage will secure our future. The weight of that sentence echoed in her mind every time she thought of Jared. One evening, after a long day of meetings and royal matters, Valtoria retreated to the palace gardens once more. She had hoped for a quiet moment to think, but as she walked through the winding paths lined with trees, she saw Jared once again. He was standing by the fountain, looking out over the water. Her heart twisted. She wanted to be angry at him, to push him away, but a part of her couldn't help but feel drawn to him. She took a deep breath and approached him. "Why do you make it so hard?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Jared turned to face her, his expression soft but filled with understanding. "Make what hard?" "Make me question everything," Valtoria said, stepping closer. "I'm supposed to do my duty, marry Prince Leos, and carry out my father's wishes. But every time I see you, I feel something I can't explain." Jared's eyes were steady as he met her gaze. "What is it that you feel, Valtoria?" She paused. How could she explain it? It wasn't just attraction, it wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper, something that made her question everything she had been taught. She had never allowed herself to feel anything but duty. But now, it seemed impossible to ignore the emotions swirling inside her. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent my entire life being told that my duty is to my people, to my family, and to the Empire. But when I'm around you, it's like all of that doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense." Jared took a step closer, his tone gentle. "Maybe it doesn't have to make sense. Maybe it's just about what feels right." Valtoria shook her head, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. "I've never been able to choose. I don't know what it's like to make a decision based on what I want. Everything has been about what the kingdom needs, what my father demands. I've never had the chance to follow my heart." Jared reached out slightly but stopped before touching her, as though waiting for permission. "Then maybe it's time to start thinking for yourself." Her breath caught in her throat. His words made her feel something she had buried deep inside for years, the desire for freedom, for choice. But she couldn't give in to it. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "If I don't marry Prince Leos, my father will be furious. The Empire will lose its place in the galaxy. I can't abandon my responsibilities just because I'm confused about my feelings." Jared's expression grew serious. "You're not abandoning anything by choosing what's best for you. What's the point of being a ruler if you're not happy? What's the point of ruling an empire if you lose yourself in the process?" Valtoria turned away, looking out at the horizon. Her heart ached. What he said made sense, but the fear of disappointing her father, the fear of failing her people, held her back. She had been trained to think about the future of the Empire above everything else. She couldn't be weak. She couldn't be selfish. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," she said, her voice quieter now. "I was never given a choice. I was always told what to do. My whole life has been about making decisions for the good of others. But now I don't know what I want." Jared didn't respond at first. He let the silence hang between them. And for a moment all Valtoria could hear was the soft rustling of the leaves in the breeze. Finally he spoke, his voice low, but firm. "Maybe it's time to give yourself permission to want something. Maybe it's time to stop letting the world tell you what to do." Valtoria turned to face him, her chest tightening. She had spent so long keeping her emotions buried, keeping herself in control. But now, with Jared standing before her, his sincerity and his words felt like a key unlocking something inside her. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, almost to herself. Jared gave her a soft, understanding smile. "You don't have to know everything right now. You just have to know that you're not alone in this. You don't have to face this decision by yourself." His words, his kindness made her feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. But it was also terrifying. If she allowed herself to feel this, to believe in it, she would have to face the consequences. But for the first time in her life, Valtoria wasn't sure if she was afraid anymore. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but the idea of living a life dictated by others was becoming unbearable. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Jared nodded, a reassuring smile still on his face. "Anytime, Valtoria. Anytime." As Valtoria walked away, her mind raced. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't even know what the future held. But for the first time, she felt like she had the power to choose. And that was a start.